This episode is brought to you by Nordstrom. Spring calls for a wardrobe refresh, and Nordstrom has the best styles of the season. From dresses and denim to standout tops and accessories, find the trends and essentials that feel right for you. Discover new arrivals from brands you love like Wave, Princess Polly, Mango, Adidas, and Free People. Plus, free shipping and returns and free styling appointments make everything so easy. Shop in stores at Nordstrom.com or download the Nordstrom app.
You set the table, put on a playlist, even made the lasagna from scratch. And now you're wearing it. OxyClean Max Force Spray tackles tough, set-in stains the first time. Adulting is hard. Fighting stains shouldn't be. OxyClean Max Force. It's not clean unless it's OxyClean.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of True Crime with Caitlyn. Today I'm going to tell you all about a case which for over 4 decades has haunted the small town of Kilgore. 5 people seemingly disappeared from a KFC restaurant, and when they were discovered, this was the beginning of a case which has taken over 40 years to finally solve. It was only in December just gone that the case was officially closed. This is the case of the Kilgore KFC Massacre. Kilgore is situated around about 100 miles from Dallas in East Texas. It's nicknamed the City of Stars due to the big multicolored starlights that are fixed on top of the many oil derricks. They sort of look like phone masts. Kilgore is an oil town, and so these derricks were absolutely everywhere, all along the high street, and so the stars were put there as a little bit of creative decoration. And honestly, they look really nice. Within the town, which had a population of around about 11,000, the people were described as nice, wholesome, everyone knew everyone, and it was a very family-oriented area. People and their families would live in Kilgore for generations. Something that the town really bonded over was their love of sports, specifically high school American football. Usually there would be matches on every Friday night, and when they were on, every single seat in the house was taken. Because of this, as a sort of knock-on effect, the local KFC was usually the busiest on a Friday night. People would come and go to get bites to eat before the matches, and families would usually come in afterwards for a quick meal. So yeah, the Friday night shift was definitely the most hectic and busiest one. The 23rd of September 1983 was a Friday, and 17-year-old Kim Miller had been so busy working inside the restaurant that she had missed the afternoon slot to deposit the day's takings into the bank. This wasn't going to stress or worry her though, because her mum, 37-year-old Mary Tyler, was the assistant manager of the restaurant. So Kim rang up her mum sometime after 9 p.m. and told her that she had missed the deposit, that about $2,000 was sat in the till, and before long, Mary was walking back into the KFC after she had already clocked off from her day at work earlier on in the day. Shortly after Mary's arrival, which was just before 10 p.m, Kim clocked out and briefly left the restaurant. Upon her returning, she immediately knew that something wasn't right. The front door to the KFC was locked, which wasn't a glaring red flag. It was after closing time, so that was to be expected. What wasn't, however, was what Kim found inside. She made her way around the back and saw that the back doors were wide open. The key was still in the lock on the inside of the door, and on the ground were bags of rubbish which had been dropped. One of the closing shift responsibilities was that they had to take the rubbish out, so it looked like that someone had started doing that, but then not finished it. When Kim made her way inside, she found the KFC in complete disarray and destruction. It had been ransacked. There was stuff all over the floor, including bags of flour with flour spilling out of them, white work caps and more. There was a dent in the wall which looked like someone had been forcefully pushed into it, and on the ground beneath the till, there was a pool of blood. Kim saw all of this, but not a trace of any of the 3 staff members who should have been there. Her mother Mary, 20-year-old Joey Johnson, and 39-year-old Opie Hughes. Kim left the restaurant and rang her stepfather, Mary's husband, Bill Tyler, to ask if Mary was there. Had she returned home? Had he heard from her? But as Bill was sitting at home, watching the clock, realising that his wife has taken longer than he expected to close the restaurant, that's when the phone rang with Kim on the other end. So, no, he replied. Mary wasn't at home and he would be at the restaurant as quickly as he could. When he arrived, Kim took Bill inside and showed him the state of the restaurant. Something had obviously happened. Someone had been hurt, and praying that it wasn't Mary, they began ringing around the different hospitals, A&Es, to see if either Mary, Joey or Opie had been admitted there, but each and every one said no. It was around 11:30 p.m. when Kim and Bill decided to contact the police, reporting that 3 people were missing. When the Kilgore police arrived, they'd done a sweep of the scene and quite quickly figured out the motive for whatever had happened to Mary, Joey and Opie. The till, which only hours before had over $2,000 in it, was empty. There was not a single sign of that $2K that Kim had seen earlier, but what was described as petty cash was also stolen. In my head, I imagine those plastic charity bucket things like that. To the police, this was very clearly a robbery that had gone wrong, but how wrong, they had no idea. As the police are combing through the restaurant trying to figure it out, what had happened, where had Mary, Joey and Opie gone, another woman was sat at home having similar thoughts. 18-year-old Lana Maxwell was growing impatient and then worried when her husband, 20-year-old David Maxwell, and his friend Monty Landers hadn't returned home. David worked at the Kilgore KFC, but on that evening he wasn't working. He and Monty had went to the restaurant to meet Joey. Joey and David were good friends who, at this moment in time, were sharing a motorbike because David had lost the keys to his own. So him and Joey were actually sharing Joey's motorbikes and were giving each other lifts to and from work or college or wherever else that they needed to go. So on this evening, David and Monty had went up to the restaurant on Joey's motorbike to pick him up, ready for him finishing work. By the time it ticked over to 3 a.m, however, and David still hadn't returned, Lana could wait no longer, and so she contacted the police to report him missing. Them now realising there wasn't just 3 missing persons to find, all of the people disappearing from the same place, there was 5. At around about 9:30 a.m. the following morning, up to 14 miles away in rural Rusk County, a man is driving down a road towards an oil field ready to start a day at work when he notices something ahead of him lay on the side of the road. He pulls up beside them and calls out, telling what he can now see as people to get up. He's thinking that they must have been out drinking and fell asleep here or something like that. There was no reasonable explanation for them to be laying there like that. But as he got out of his vehicle and approached them, that's when he realised they weren't sleeping. He saw their stillness, then the blood, and realised that he was looking at 4 dead bodies. Police were quickly called and they arrived at the scene within minutes. Shortly after their arrival, they were quite confident that they were looking at the people who had gone missing from nearby Kilgore KFC. It was all but confirmed because some of the people were still wearing their uniforms. The bodies of Mary Tyler, Joey Johnson, David Maxwell and Monty Landers were all found lay beside each other, face down on the ground and their heads resting on their arms. They had all been shot execution style, and the amount of fear that must have gone through them when they heard them first few shots, knowing that they were next, knowing that they were going to die, must have been absolutely horrifying, debilitating with fear. Police on the scene didn't think that the victims truly believed that they were going to be killed, but that they were murdered in the position that they were found. If they had been shot when they were standing, or maybe even on their knees, when they dropped they would all be in different positions, but they were all there exactly the same, like they were ordered to do so. Maybe their abductor had promised and assured them that if they did as they were told, their lives would be spared. But that wasn't what happened. 37-year-old Mary Tyler was the epitome of a strong woman. After her first marriage broke down, she alone raised her 3 children, one of whom was disabled. My son is also disabled, and I know just having the one, it can be so hard, so Mary doing it with 3, she deserves all our flowers. The family did struggle financially, but Mary never let this get in the way of anything that her babies needed. She would happily work all around the clock to be able to provide for them. She was a very loving and beloved mother. While working in a different KFC, she would meet Billy Tyler, and the two fell in love. Billy was described as being crazy for Mary, and he would say that she was the love of his life. Billy's own children took to her very well, and his daughters truly considered her to be their second mother. She was so caring, loving, and she treated all of the children equally. She would work as the assistant manager at Kilgore KFC alongside her daughter Kim, and she still had all of the energy to come home to clean, cook, and care for her family. 39-year-old Opie Ann Hughes shared a lot of these qualities. She was a happily married, loving mother to 3, described as gentle, kind, soft-spoken, and the type of woman who wouldn't hurt a fly. David Maxwell was a 20-year-old newlywed who was working part-time at KFC alongside being a student at Kilgore College. He was working to provide for himself and his wife Lana, whom he absolutely adored. Here is a clip of Lana describing her husband.
David loved me first. You know how girls chase boys all the time. David was the first one who said, "I love you." He was the first one who ever treated me like he did. He used to bring me flowers and balloons, and he would dance when there's no music with me.
In recent weeks, David had been even more excited as he and Lana were about to start their own family. When David was murdered, Lana was 3 months pregnant. David was described as someone who laughed and joked on a lot. He was joyful, he was kind, considerate, and boasted to his co-workers about how happy he was. David and Joey Johnson, who was also 20, were fraternity brothers at college and really close friends. Joey was a prankster. He was a barrel of laughs and the type of person who made your face hurt from laughing. In his senior year of high school, he was, quote, Mr. Overton High. He enjoyed playing basketball and he worked as a cook at the KFC restaurant. Monty Landers was also a part of this friendship group. He also went to college and was described as a clear-cut good guy. Mary, Monty and David had all been shot at least twice in the head and back, execution style. Joey was shot 3 times, having an additional wound to his side, so it was theorized that maybe he tried to get up, maybe he wanted to make a run for it. Officers quickly realised that someone was missing. There were 5 missing person reports and yet only 4 bodies in front of them. Where was Opie Hughes? She was discovered around about 50 metres away from everyone else, and the initial theory was that she had successfully made a run for it. She had gotten away but was pursued by the attacker and then shot multiple times. Each of the victims had their cash, their purses and/or wallets and jewellery stolen from them, further cementing the idea that this was a robbery-based motive. Due to the severity of the case, the Texas Rangers were enlisted to help and they scoped out both of the scenes. At the time, fingerprints were all the rage, so they tried dusting for them, but to no avail. Blood items were recovered from the restaurant, including a napkin and a box lid, but because this is the 80s, there wasn't a lot that could be done with them aside from storing them and hoping it could be used later if and when the science caught up. Here is the district attorney for Rusk County explaining what a ranger discovered.
Texas Ranger Glenn Elliott is looking at things and notices a box lid with a distinctive blood spatter pattern. Blood spatter science is just starting to take off, and he believes that it's high velocity and that somebody's been hit and that blood's moved that way and hit that box lid. And in the back room, there's a napkin, and he forms the opinion that was cast off blood, just like somebody had had a bloody nose or something. And so that it did interest that ranger, but it didn't necessarily interest most officers at the time. Fingerprint was the science of the day in 1983, and so they were really going heavy with fingerprint dust and trying to lift prints from cash register, from the counter, from everywhere.
The napkin being considered to be cast off blood, like someone had had a bloody nose, was especially interesting to me. It was later assumed that it was Mary who was attacked while she was stood at the till, that she was struck in her face, nose, mouth area, so potentially that could have been some of the blood from the lid, and maybe she fought back. She could have thrown her elbow back or something like that to defend herself and made her attacker bleed, them then grabbing a tissue to wipe it away. At the scene where the bodies were found, there was not a single scrap of additional evidence. The Rangers got so desperate for at least a sliver of a lead, something for them to follow, that they brought in the help of 2 psychics, but they never found anything. To aid in the investigation, KFC would put up an award of $50,000 for information leading to a conviction. The bodies of Mary, David, Joey, Opie and Monty were taken to Dallas for their autopsy examinations. This is where it was confirmed that at least 2 guns, one of them being a .38, maybe even 3, were used in the executions, which gave police an idea on how many perpetrators were involved. It seemed unlikely that maybe even at gunpoint, one singular person would be able to overpower 5 other people, forcing them to submit. But 2 or maybe 3 gun-wielding people, that would be much more likely, more believable. It was during Joey's autopsy that the Rangers got their first promising, damning lead. In the waistband of his trousers, there was a long, broken fingernail. His fingernails were all intact, or how they should have been, so where did this random broken fingernail come from? The Rangers were convinced that this must have belonged to one of the killers, so that was sent off to the lab for later comparison. Now, because DNA was still very much in its infancy, the way that they would compare the fingernail sample that they sent off to any future samples to send was by direct comparison. Someone would visually look at both of the fingernails and compare either the band pattern of the nail or the striations, which is basically the ridges. If they perfectly matched, they were considered to be from the same person. While all of this was going on, Rangers and officers started looking into people that they already knew, known troublemakers and offenders in the area, and it didn't take long for 30-year-old James Earl Mankins Jr. to come to their attention. He just so happened to be the son of a very powerful, well-respected state representative. James was a known drug dealer in the area, he had a criminal history, and so of course the Rangers wanted to speak to him. He voluntarily sat down for an interview where, when asked, he completely denied any involvement in the abductions or the murders. But the interviewers were less interested in what he had to say because they noticed something on his right hand. The middle finger of that hand, the fingernail, was torn. It was torn so far down that just off looking at it, they thought that the fingernail they found in Joey's trousers must have been his. They took pictures of James's fingernail, or the lack thereof it, and once it grew back, they took clippings of that new nail and sent it off to the lab for the comparison. The belief being that your fingernails are just as unique as your DNA. Rangers discovered that on the day of the murders, James had just been released from prison after serving a sentence for unlawfully carrying a weapon. That weapon was of course confiscated from him, but he borrowed another gun from one of his friends for whatever reason. This happened to be a .38, the same caliber as one of the guns used in the murders. While awaiting the fingernail comparisons, the Rangers got an idea of what was going around in the rumour mill. It was a small town, and so people were going to talk. They heard that apparently the Kilgore KFC restaurant was basically a drug den. You could apparently drive through the drive-thru and buy some meth with your popcorn chicken. This was not true in the slightest though. No one working there was involved in any sort of drug activity, but sort of clinging onto that, another rumour was that inside the restaurant safe was a written down step-by-step recipe for high-grade methamphetamine. Could someone have wanted that recipe so bad that they would kill for it? James was a known drug dealer, so could this have been part of his motive for murder? When the fingernail analysis came back, everyone involved piled into a room and they sat with their hearts beating as they awaited the call with the results. When the phone began to ring and was clicked onto loudspeaker, the lab technician confirmed that the sample taken from Joey's trousers and the one provided by James were one and the same. The nails belonged to the same man, and with this, the Rangers were confident that they had their murderer. Their only piece of evidence actually helped them to crack the case. Aside from this, there was nothing else that tied James to the murders, so hearing this confirmation was a relief to the Rangers. The only kind of nagging thing was that they didn't believe that one person alone was able to commit the murders, and James, who was still denying to the death that he was involved, wasn't going to be giving them any names. Rangers would receive a tip from a woman named Star Powers. This is the Assistant Attorney General relaying what Star said.
And on the night of the murders, Star came in to the KFC just a few minutes before closing time. She saw an employee on the phone right by the counter, and she heard her say, "Somebody didn't make the deposit today. There's $2,000 in here." And Star remembered thinking to herself, "Oh, she shouldn't say that out loud." And she noticed that there were two men immediately behind her. And she thought that they heard the same thing.
So we'll delve into that tip a little bit more. Star and her partner arrived at the Kilgore KFC between 9 and 10 p.m. While they're walking into the restaurant, they noticed a white van out the back, and this stuck out to them because it wasn't like parked up in a space or anything, it was just there nearby the rubbish bins. As they were in the queue waiting to order their food, they overheard Kim on the phone to Mary about the deposit not being done and $2,000 still being sat in the till. Star immediately thought that Kim shouldn't be saying that type of thing out loud, and she was sure that the two men behind her, who she described as black, had overheard it too. Star and her partner sat down and ate their food and noticed that the men had taken theirs to go. They walked out of the restaurant and then headed towards the back of the building where that strange white van was. When Star and her partner left, the van was still there. She gave the officers descriptions of the men, and this was passed across other jurisdictions, shared with other agencies, and even with some of their informants who were in jail/prison, hoping that someone would be able to recognise one of the men and give over at least one of their names. It was actually one of the informants who was able to come up with the names, those being Darnell Hartsfield and Romeo Pinkerton, two men who were cousins and known to the police. Upon searching their names, the Rangers saw that there was already a warrant out for Darnell's arrest. Days after the abduction and executions in Kilgore, 30 miles away in Tyler, Darnell was suspected of committing another armed robbery, and the circumstances were eerily similar. Both of the robberies happened towards the end of the day. All of the money was taken from the till along with, quote, petty cash. The employees were forced onto the ground at gunpoint and were ordered to lie with their heads down on their hands. Almost the exact same position that Mary, David, Joey and Monty were discovered in. Romeo Pinkerton was eventually tracked down and questioned. Surprisingly, he had a rock-solid alibi. He was incarcerated at the time that the murder took place. He wasn't actually released from prison until days later, so it would have been impossible for him to have committed the crime. Darnell Hartsfield is found weeks later, and he's arrested and charged in connection with the Tyler armed robbery. When he's questioned surrounding the Kilgore killings, it's the 1st of November, so just over 5 weeks later. Darnell denied involvement and accepted the opportunity to undergo a polygraph examination, one that he passed with flying colours. For the officers, this was enough to believe him and rule him out as a suspect. Back then, they would put a lot more stock into results of polygraph examinations than we do now. Now we have a better understanding of how unreliable they are. In fact, in the UK, they can't even be used as evidence in court. And so, just like that, both Darnell and Romeo were ruled out as being involved with the KFC Kilgore killings. I wonder if they were ruled out so quickly because their names essentially came from tips and not from evidence like how James's had. Speaking of him, officers continued to get tips in about him, which only strengthened their case and their suspicions against him. At some point, he was in prison, allegedly going about like he thought he was invincible. He apparently bragged to people that he had committed the brutal murders and that a Texas Ranger, who was good friends with his state representative dad, helped him to cover it up, that they were never going to nail him for it. According to these claims, James said that he had committed the murders because he needed money, 5 lives being worth $2,000. Following these tips, his cellmate agreed to wear a wire. The Rangers, of course, hoping that he would say something incriminating on the recording, but he didn't, and nothing came of the recordings. As of then, the only evidence that they had against him was his fingernail, and it wasn't enough to charge him, definitely not enough to convict him without any reasonable doubt. That wouldn't come for another 10 years. In the 1980s, the investigation into the Kilgore KFC massacre went cold, and not for a lack of investigation, for a lack of leads and technology. On the 10th anniversary of the killings, the 28th of September 1993, there was a substantial amount of media coverage on it. It was a huge case in Kilgore, an open wound that was still raw to so many people, especially those who were directly involved. People could not fathom how 10 years later it was still open. No one had been charged, no one had been convicted, there was absolutely no justice for any of the victims. Mary's stepdaughters had really tried to progress the case, writing letters, making phone calls, and finally, with the help of other victims' family members, they got somewhere. They reached out to the district attorney, asking them to get assistance from the Attorney General, to which he agreed. The district attorney became committed to help cracking this case. With such major progression in DNA technology in the past decade, forensics and science, it was possible that a cold case could now be solved. The only piece of evidence that they still had was that fingernail, and so once again, it was sent off to a lab in Dallas to see if any DNA profile could be lifted from it. A conclusive DNA match would be much more convincing than what they currently had, even though it was still quite new technology. A profile was successfully lifted from the fingernail, and it matched James, their main suspect, the person that they had had their eyes on from pretty much day dot. James Earl Mankins Jr. was indicted in March 1995. The prosecution was able to convince a grand jury that there was enough evidence to take James to court and try him for this heinous crime, finally getting justice for the family after almost 11 and a half years. While he is sat in his jail cell awaiting his trial, the prosecution enlisted the help of the Armed Forces Institution of Pathology. These were the best of the best at the time, and if they said that this was James's fingernail, that it was his DNA, it was essentially game over for him. The prosecution enlisted their help because they wanted an ironclad case. They wanted no wiggle room for James. The prosecution couldn't have called in a better witness. However, when the results came back like a punch to the gut, they revealed that it wasn't James's. The nail, the only bit of evidence that they had had against him for the past 10 years, and it wasn't even his. After learning this, there was no going back, and so all of the charges against him being dropped. The general consensus within the community at the time wasn't that he was released because he didn't do it, but that he was released because of his powerful father. Of course, corruption is unfortunately a thing. It shouldn't be. It wasn't in this case. Following the release of their main and only suspect, the case into the Kilgore massacre once again went cold. In December 2000, a new sheriff is brought in, and he just so happened to be friends with David Maxwell before his passing. He was determined to try and solve this case and bring justice for his friend. He enlisted the help of a retired FBI agent who actually worked on the case from the very start. Together, the men hoped that with their drive, their fresh eyes, and the new technology, that they would be able to close this case together. They combed through every case file, every piece of the crime, the scene, and what little evidence they had, hoping that they would spot something that everyone else had missed, that they would find something that they could now use with their new technology, and they went through everything with a fine-tooth comb. They would discover that there were 2 pieces of evidence that were still being stored, which had blood on them. This being the box lid and the napkin, and when the sheriff and agent found these, they now had the technology to examine it and see what would come up. 2 different profiles would come up from each of the pieces of evidence, and they were able to match these profiles to 2 men. The blood on the box belonged to Darnell Hartsford, and the blood on the napkin, Romeo Pinkerton, 2 men they had already questioned and completely ruled out as being suspects. How on earth did everyone else miss this? Back in the 80s, Romeo said that he was incarcerated when the murders took place, that he wasn't released until days later, but that wasn't the truth. When this was cross-checked, the days didn't match. He was actually released days before the murders. How or why this wasn't checked or picked up on back then is completely lost on me. Darnell was ruled out because of his polygraph result, but as I've already said, we know that they're not reliable. The victim's clothing was re-examined, likely for the possibility of minute blood being found that could further incriminate the cousins. We know that at some point they'd been bleeding, so it wasn't outlandish to think that maybe a little bit of blood could have got on some of the victim's clothing. O.P. Hughes, who was found a short distance away from the rest of the victims, was thought to have tried to have run off when she was murdered, and that's why she was separated from them. But during this re-examination, semen was found in her pants. It's still possible that she had tried to flee, but was she separated to be raped? Did that happen whilst her co-workers, who were all so close that they considered each other like family, had to listen? Or did she have to hear them be executed before being raped and then shot herself? The DNA profile that was lifted from the semen wasn't a match to either Romeo or Darnell. This kind of further cemented the hunch that 3 perpetrators were involved. The DNA extracted from the semen didn't match anyone in their system. It didn't match James, who for a long time was their main suspect, and of course they tested it against Opie's husband and it didn't match him either. Anyone that they asked said that there was absolutely no way that Opie could have been seeing another man behind her husband's back, because of course that was a possibility too. Maybe the semen had nothing to do with the murders, but everyone they spoke to said that was impossible. She was very modest, and her husband said that he had never even seen her wear a vest. The trial for the murders was moved from Rusk County to New Boston because of how huge it was. You had to be living under a rock to not have heard anything about it. Darnell Hartsford and Romeo Pinkerton were both indicted with 5 counts of capital murder. Capital meaning that this was a death penalty case. Romeo agreed to a plea deal where, in return for his guilty pleas on all 5 counts, he would receive a life sentence, which he did. He accepted the plea deal and was sentenced to life imprisonment. Darnell went through with a trial where the prosecution laid out what they believed happened. That both of the men were stood behind Star Powers when they overheard Kim mentioning the $2,000 inside the till. They left with their food and waited until all of the customers were gone and the restaurant was empty. They awaited an opportunity to break inside, and upon seeing Joey bringing out the rubbish, they pounced, forcing him back into the restaurant where a struggle ensued. They would somehow manage to get 5 people to submit to them, following their orders of leaving the restaurant, sitting in a vehicle for up to 14 miles, likely that suspicious white van, I don't know what other vehicles 7 people could fit into, walk along a desolate road, hop a fence and lie down on the floor until they were executed. In October 2008, Darnell was convicted on all 5 charges and sentenced to life imprisonment. Since his incarceration, Romeo Pinkerton has questioned the investigation and even alluded to evidence being planted. Have a listen.
The names David Maxwell, Joey Johnson, Monty Landers.
I don't know any of them.
You don't know any of them?
Never seen them day in my life. Anytime a black, they can get a black man to cop out to something, they satisfied. First of all, we're gonna start with the investigation. If you can see in this left-hand corner, this is what they found, nothing. They couldn't even lift a fingerprint. So how could I be convicted of a crime that I did not do? If they couldn't convict, they really didn't want to do the crime scene because they admitted that the crime scene had already been trampled through. How long you think blood gonna last on a napkin? 23 years. What color would you think the napkin would be? Okay, when they brought it to the trial, it's just like brand new. So now you tell me who lying, who telling the truth.
Since the discovery of the semen in Opie's pants back in the early 2000s, the question of who that belonged to, who assaulted Opie, has haunted the case. This person was still out there, completely nameless, getting away with what they had done. That was until December just gone, 2025, when the semen sample was linked to a man named Devon Riggs, genealogy helping to confirm his identity. Devon was a man with a lengthy criminal record who had lived in East Texas and then over in California for some time too. He left East Texas in 1985, so was still thoroughly in the mix of everything when the case exploded, but he managed to evade justice. He left East Texas before the DNA databases were a thing, and that is how he was never tracked down. This discovery would come 42 years after the murders and 15 years too late for justice, as he died in 2010. Darnell Hartsford died behind bars in January 2023. Romeo Pinkerton has applied for parole twice, once in 2019 and then again in 2024. Both times he was denied. The case of the Kilgore KFC Massacre, where Mary Tyler, Opie Hughes, Joey Johnson, David Maxwell and Monty Landers lost their life, is now officially closed. Police are not looking into anyone else for being connected to this savage murder. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. Don't forget to follow the podcast so that you never miss a new upload. You can also find pictures and updates over on the Instagram at TrueCrimeCaitlyn. I appreciate you for being here, and I'll catch you all on the next one.